We are live. So, everyone, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I'm just going to make a quick adjustment to some audio here. Hold on. All right, that should be better. Perfect. Okay. So, I see Mr. Steparik is in the house, buddy. When all this COVID stuff clears up, let's meet for an adult beverage. I know we keep saying that, but man, oh man. And Top Gun 2 is coming out, so talk to me, Goose. And folks, that will only make sense to Mark Steparik and myself. So. For those of you watching live, fantastic. We've got a whole bunch of different platforms going on here tonight. So YouTube, a couple Facebook groups, and so on and so forth. So really excited to have everyone on board. And if you're watching the replay, then that's great too. So before we get too far into this, just a couple of announcements, one of which is the summit is still, well, it's obviously going on because it's pre-recorded. So I'd encourage you to sign up at ddbsummit.com. And again, like I keep saying, the feedback's fantastic. It's free. And you have lifetime access to it. So you can watch the videos at your leisure. There's audio, so you can download it and listen to it in your car or along for your walk and whatever. And it's not just me pontificating about leadership. It's about people that truly, friends and colleagues of mine that navigate and lead through chaos on a very, very regular basis in a large scale. So one of the individuals, for example, 9 hurricane responses and World Trade Center, or 9/11, both at World Trade Center and at the Pentagon, for example. And another gentleman, 30 some years with Chicago Fire and many years as their training chief. We've got another individual, Boston Hazmat, and he was working the day of the Boston Marathon bombing. So he talks about what that experience was like. Today, our podcast episode dropped, and it's Suzanne Bernier, a fellow Canadian, and she's got a long list, including she's an author of a book called Disaster Heroes, When Ordinary People Step Up During Times of Disaster, and she's just a long list of credentials there. Tim Carwell, who's a local entrepreneur here in Edmonton, a good friend of mine, talks about the business aspects of it, and everything is designed and kind of encapsulated within the context of my mission, which is assisting well-meaning managers, corporate managers, become leaders. And not just managers, but business professionals and entrepreneurs become leaders using the 30 plus years of experience that I have kind of on the front lines. So, and the 3 pillars that I operate under, and it's what I call the transformational leadership method. And everything I do is around these 3 pillars. One is self-mastery. So if you can't control what happens on the inside, then you're kind of hooped when it comes time to influence on the outside. And that's the second pillar, which is positive influence. Ultimately, as leaders, and leadership is about influence and asserting social influence. And we can be a negative influence or a positive influence. And I would prefer to lean on the side of the positive for sure. And then the third one is execution. And so we can talk all day long about books and material like videos and YouTube and all of that other stuff. But at the end of the day, you have to execute. That's what leadership is really all about. So things like making a decision. So I talk a lot about for instance, the 80-20 rule. Get to 80% and then pull the trigger, and then you will evaluate and adjust as you need to. So everything I'm doing is around those 3 things. And that leads me to my podcast, which I'm really leaning into. I'm super excited about. It's gaining some good traction. And the summit actually led me down a better path around, I've pumped out a whack of episodes, just solo episodes. And as much as I love hearing myself talk, it was time to bring in some other opinions and voices. So the summit was really invigorating for me, and so I ended up reaching out to a lot of other people who I am actually personally interested in talking to around leadership, and also people over the months and years that have reached out to me saying, hey, let's work together. So I kind of reached back out, and it's kind of one of those things, build it and they will come, because man, oh man, we've got some like absolutely awesome guests lined up. And literally just today, actually, I spoke to an executive leadership coach from Calgary, and we talked a lot about vulnerability and empathy and trust. And those are topics that typically don't get discussed when we talk about leadership. So that episode will be dropping next week. I think we're going to shuffle a few things around and put hers in. And I'm going dropping episodes twice a week during this period of time. So today was Suzanne Bernier. And then Thursday is a good friend of mine, Cheryl Oxford, who is the issues management and communications director for the mayor of Edmonton, where I live. And she talks about how to give news or bad news, because part of the leadership journey, part of the leadership responsibility is not always to talk about raw stuff, but to sometimes give some unpleasant news, if you will. So that's dropping Thursday. So head on over to Apple or Spotify or Google or whatever the case is, and I would ask that you subscribe, because we've got a whole bunch of other guests coming down the pipe. We have a gentleman from Harvard. We have a personal idol of mine in terms of human behavior and stress management, Lawrence Gonzalez, who's he is an author of a book called Deep Survival, which is one of the few books. I'm a pretty big nerd when it comes to books, but his book was one that really, I think I had more penciled notes in it than actually hard print in the book itself, right? I was just nerding out so hard about this. And so I reached out to him through a mutual friend. I said, "Hey, sir, can you please?" And lo and behold, he replied right back. He's like, "Hells yeah, count me in. I love what you're doing with everything." So I'll have him on, just working out those details. And I think what we'll do is we'll make that a live episode and stream it live so that a lot of people can ask some questions, because he is literally one of the world's experts on stress and stress management and performing under stress. And he has really shaped how I personally handle stress with regard to stress management and how I handle myself. So when I go to, I've been to Canada's two largest disasters, frankly, and it's tools and techniques that he literally talks about there in his books that have guided me through. So, and yeah, a couple, "Hey buddy, how are you doing?" And yeah, it's a great book. And it was, I don't remember what year it was published, but it's one book that I've talked about literally in every course I've ever taught, frankly. And I used to carry the actual copy around with me, but somebody stole it, frankly. And I get it, I totally get it. It's a pretty good nerdy book. So anyways, I'm talking to Lawrence in a little bit, and like I talked about a gentleman from Harvard, and who doesn't love Harvard, right? They're the smartest people on the planet, I think. So we're going to be talking a lot about leadership with them. Mentor of mine, Colin Boyd, and I just sat down and had a great conversation around how to be a more effective communicator, but more effective speaker as a leader, because a lot of what we need to do is present information, facilitate meetings, all those other things. And then given the environment that we're in now, where we have to exert that influence kind of over the interweb, that can be really hard. And so we talk a lot about that. So that's coming up over the next few weeks. And so, hey, Candace. So yeah, really, really excited for those. But anyways, I digress. Let's do a quick review. Tonight is about how to manage stress, or this content is about how to manage stress. But we'll do a very quick review of what we covered off yesterday, because I can't say enough the importance of what we covered off previously around what I'm calling and what is called the universal truth, which is the self-coaching model. So this is part two. In previous slides here, this is what I presented last night. I went through in a bit more detail, but this is a little bit more of a review. So really, really important in terms of self-mastery. If you want to get to the point where you're actually truly in control of your own life, you're in control of your professional life, your personal life, whatever that might look like, you have to, I shouldn't say you have to. I would strongly recommend that you learn this model and you learn the concepts within it. Because if you do, then it will absolutely change the direction of a day, of a month, of a year, whatever that looks like. So it really is based on the fact that we have circumstances, right? There's a circumstance. Hey there, Mr. McDonald. So we have a circumstance, and this is really important because people that are in emergency management, for example, like Dean McDonald, who is a true expert in it, we recognize that information is just information. It's neither good nor it's bad. So I remember we were responding in a location in southern Alberta, and we have a whole bunch of people conducting rescues and getting people out of homes and changing, just lots of stuff going on. And then an alert comes up that there's a flash flood warning for the exact area that we're operating in. And so that's a circumstance. That's a fact, right? There is a flash flood potential that is going to rip through this particular small town in southern Alberta, of which we had, I think we had 140 responders there, of which I was partially responsible for. And so that information came in, and it just is, right? It just is. And so maybe that's also a death in the family. That is a circumstance. So we're entitled to our opinion, but we're not entitled to our own facts. And so it all starts with a circumstance that happens. They're neutral. And then here's where the trouble can begin for us human beings, as volatile, emotional human beings. It's good and it's bad, I suppose. But from a circumstance is a thought, right? And it's typically a single sentence. And it's kind of a judgment. This is where the judgment starts, right? So we have a flash flood. Oh, shoot, that's really bad. Well, then now you start going down a certain path, or death in the family, whatever that example is. But you have a circumstance, and then the first step in the process is a thought, and it can be positive or negative. Typically choose negative. Then from that thought, we have an emotion or a feeling generated from that thought. And so that's now where we start to get even further down the rabbit hole. So we have a circumstance which just happened. It just is. And we have a thought around that. And then we have some sort of an emotion attached to it. And then that emotion drives our actions, and then we get our results, right? And so that is the self-coaching model. And you can really troubleshoot. This is the beauty of the system is it's like wiring almost. If you're having a shitty day, if you're having if you're not happy with the situation that we're going through right now, the circumstance just is what it is. And so it's just neutral. And now the thought, think about your thought around that, and then how that drives the rest. So if you're having a bad day, you can look back through and say, okay, why am I having a bad day? What has happened? What is the circumstance that has led to this? And then you can just start to troubleshoot it from there. Very, very important. And also we talked about change the words and you change everything. And what that has to do with is, I know, pretty fancy graphic of a brain here. That is definitely not mine. One, it's heavily active. And two, it's pretty big. So thank you, internet, for bailing me out. But words matter, and reframing is really, really important, because subconsciously we don't have the ability to interpret, right? The subconscious mind it just is. It takes imprints. So it doesn't judge, it doesn't say bigger, smaller, any of those other things, or good or bad. It just is. And so any words you use are actually going directly into your subconscious, and that is what your subconscious is picking up. So really, really important. So, even self-limiting beliefs like I'm bad at math. Well, what happens is then that becomes your reality, right? So this, again, the subconscious doesn't say, oh, hold on, no, you're pretty good at math. No, that's not what happens. It's not up to the subconscious to figure that out. And the problem with that is that leads to what we call confirmation bias. I guess I'm saying a problem, but it can also be a good thing, because confirmation bias is once we've kind of arrived on a conclusion, once we've arrived on a thought or a belief, subconsciously we start looking for things that support that, good or bad. And that's why it's incredibly difficult to argue with somebody around politics, or stats are a really good example where, so let's say if I think smoking's bad, for argument's sake, I can say that, wow, 40% of people die from smoking, right? That's terrible. Well, if I think smoking's okay, what am I going to say about that? I'll be like, hey, you know what? Like 60%, man, people live a completely healthy life. It's a pretty extreme example, but you kind of get the idea. So everything that happens just confirms your preconceived ideas or notions. And so how we trigger this whole stuff from that circumstance and that first thought is really, really important. So we talked a bit about the reframing, and then we'll get into the stress management here. But instead of using words like bad or good or painful or anything like that, use the unsomething. So it's an uncomfortable feeling, right? I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm feeling unpleasant. I'm feeling unsettled. And the reason for that is because we're hardwired to move away from pain. And so that is the problem that we run into. We are just conditioned for that. So if we use words like pain, we're subconsciously going to move away from that. And that leads us into this conversation. So I'm really excited to be talking to you about this topic right here. It's really near and dear to my heart because I can tell you that stress absolutely kills. It kills both in the short term, it can kill long term, and it is a very, very real issue in today's society. And heck, we even have a leave named after it, and that to me is a big issue. But there are some things that we're going to talk about here that you can do that are like super effective. And it's not even just mumbo jumbo or Daryl pulling this out of his butt kind of stuff. This is scientific. It's biological. It has been proven time and time and time and time and time and time again. Kind of get the idea, I'm sure. So ships don't sink because of the water around them. Ships sink because of the water that gets in them. Don't let what's happening around you get inside and weigh you down. So goes back to our conversation around circumstances, right? It is what it is. And so now stress oftentimes is actually a reaction. And what we will be talking about in this is moving from a reaction mode into a response mode. And in my transformational leadership program, we spend a lot of time on moving from reacting, so being triggered, right? You've seen that meme. From moving from being triggered to actually responding. And once you can figure out how to respond instead of like being triggered and flying off the handle, that's where the true power comes and that self-control. And when we talk about stress, you don't have to automatically get stressed out. It's a default setting, yes, but there are some very specific things we can do to respond to stress and not react to it. And that's what we'll be covering off here today. So what is stress? Very broad terms, stress is a physiological reaction or result of a threat. Now, a lot of people think it's psychological, and it is to a certain extent, but literally at its core, stress is physical. And what happens with stress is that a whole bunch of chemicals get dumped into our system, and cortisol and adrenaline, and just the list goes on and on, a whole bunch of hormonal changes. And those cause some real impacts physiologically. So non-vital body systems shut down. So things like the digestive system shuts down, the immune system shuts down, the blood starts to go to the larger muscle groups. Neurologically or psychologically, the blood starts to focus on the survival part of the brain and not the prefrontal cortex, right? The CEO part of the brain. There, and a whole bunch of other things. The blood leaves the skin because two things. One, it's going further in, and plus two, ostensibly, so that if we're in a battle, we'll bleed less. And if you go back to it, stress actually is a beautiful thing. And we'll talk about it in a bit more, but it is actually fantastic. I wouldn't be able to be driving my SUV right now, coaching hockey or dealing with my kid or going for walks or doing this if we didn't have stress in our ancestry, if we didn't have it as part of our DNA. And we'll talk about that. But where it really comes from, and what I mean by that is more specifically back in the day, my caveman ancestor was faced with a lot of physical threats. Right? Saber-toothed tiger is one of the cliches. And so if you think about it from a human perspective, I didn't have a lot of physical kind of advantages over a saber-toothed tiger at all, right? So this stress thing was installed in us because it's designed to give us really fight, flight, or freeze. So all of this adrenaline gets dumped into our system, and so that we can either fight or we can bolt, or sometimes we get so overwhelmed and we freeze. That's really what's happening here. Is it's designed in this initial confrontation with a saber-tooth tiger to deal with a short-term, typically physical threat back in the day anyways. And so now the question comes up with regard to, well, hold on a second. We don't have a saber-tooth tiger anymore, dumbass, right? Totally get it. I've gone to the zoo, well, when we could, when we were allowed to actually go outside, went to the zoo often and did not see a saber-tooth tiger. So you are correct on that, but we'll be talking a little bit more about what stress is and why we still have it. Here's the thing. The threats have changed, right? Credit card bills, loss of job, family problems, family illness, overwork, the list goes on and on. All of these, what we would consider non-physical threats, non-saber-tooth tiger related threats, those have changed, but our reactions have not. That is so important. Neurologically, physiologically, we see a threat, anything that's a danger to our normalcy or homeostasis, we see as a threat. And so as a result, the subconscious says, well, threat, fires up the old stress hormones and everything like that. And then it prepares us to fight, flight, or bolt or freeze. So that's what's really important, is the threat has changed, but our reaction has not. And so we still have this thing there. And so we need to figure out how we can move from reacting to responding to it. So what are some stress reactions? Tunnel vision. We've got irritability. We've got procrastination. We've got freezing. We've got shutting down. And I'll talk about each of these. Tunnel vision is an actual thing. If anyone has had it, I know I've experienced it pretty extensively in terms of emergency response and emergency management, but it's actually sometimes a good thing. If you think back to the saber-tooth tiger days, right? Let's keep leveraging, going back to that. Because if I have the saber-tooth tiger and I'm confronted with this, the last thing I wanted my ancestor to do was be like, oh, you know what? Oh, it's such a beautiful horizon. And just see how the sun's setting. Oh, that's just beautiful. Or, wow, you know, the wind's just blowing in from that direction, because I don't think they had east, west, and north, south back then. Yeah, guess what? Saber-tooth tiger was like, yeah, thanks, dude, but I'm going to eat you. So tunnel vision is a very specific thing, and it is a physical narrowing of the field of vision because it gives us that focus. Irritability is something where it's really the body is reacting poorly, essentially, to any kind of disruption. And so it doesn't really know how to handle it. So one of the things that our subconscious does is it knows that a good defense is a good offense. So it can, you know, you can blow up, you can yell, you can do all those other things. Procrastination, it's fear, ladies and gentlemen. That's what it is. Procrastination is nothing but fear and avoiding some sort of discomfort. That's what it is. Think about it. When you procrastinate, why? Well, you don't want to do something. Why not? There is something uncomfortable about that. Maybe it's going to be too much work. Maybe it's going to involve a difficult conversation. Maybe it's going to be, something that's going to make you uncomfortable. So of course, as human beings, we're hardwired to avoid pain and move towards pleasure if we can. So that's what procrastination is. That's a stress reaction. Freezing and shutting down, right? And we see the shutting down a lot. And there's a nerdy term that we call auditory exclusion. And that is absolutely amazing to see and hear when you do, we call them after action reviews on the emergency management side, where, you know, if there's a fatality or something, you can hear over the radio a lot, you know, and Dean, you could attest to this. It's like the radio call is coming over and over and over again. Everybody can hear it except the people that need to, because they have shut down or they have become so overloaded. And we'll talk about that here shortly. So now think back to the last time you felt stressed, right? What were the circumstances? I'm curious about that. You know, when did you feel stressed out? What were those overarching kind of circumstances around it? And notice I put stressed in quotes, and there's a particular reason for that, because we actually aren't stressed. We have experience, or we have feelings of stress. We are reacting to stress. We have stress reactions, but we are not stressed. Just like we are not angry, just like we are not happy, we are not frustrated. We are human beings feeling stress feelings. We are human beings feeling anger. We are human beings feeling happy. That goes back to, again, that self-coaching model. But what were those circumstances? Why were you feeling stressed? And if we look a little bit deeper, this is where we want to go. Chances are, I even said control twice. Wow, nice one. Perception of control, lack of control. That is such a big stressor because remember, well, hello there, Mr. McFadden. So, think about that perception of lack of control. That is such a huge stressor to human beings. Because if you think about it, last time you were under stress, chances are you didn't give power or control away. Chances are you brought it in because that is what the subconscious wants. That's what is comfortable. It's kind of a misnomer that we will rise to some heroic level under stress. It's not it at all. In fact, we go to our lowest level of effective training and experience. And there is no greater stress, or often no greater stress, than this perception of lack of control. And that is so important. So as a leader, think about that. Are you putting your team and team members into a situation where they don't have any input, where they don't have any control over? So that will automatically drive stress up. Judging someone or expectations can be stressful, where you expect them to be one way, but they're not. And I've talked a lot about navigate from where you are, not from where you wish you were. Oh man, I wish I could, make a billboard out of that. And maybe someday I will. Or maybe I'll do a GoFundMe. Navigate from where you are, not from where you wish you were. Newsflash. I would much rather be on one of those huts in the Maldives there, the huts on the ocean. No offense, right? I love talking to everybody here, but I would much rather be in the Maldives. I would much rather be in Mexico, where Dawn goes all the time. I would much rather be in a whole bunch of I would much rather be able to call Mike McFadden up or my buddy Dean or Mark or Candace and say, hey, you know what? Let's go for a beer and we don't have to be 2 meters apart. Yep, totally. That's my that's what I would expect. That's what I want, but that's not the reality. So suffering is actually in that gap where I have an expectation and then there's the reality of it. And here's where the suffering lies, right here. This is the part that sucks. And so the expectations around, they should be this way, but they're actually this way. That stresses us out. That pisses us off. And so if we can figure out that whole expectation piece, then, we can go a long ways. So that's often a stressor. And just feeling overwhelmed. Man, if you're like me, you've got a to-do list, and then you have another list of things that you're supposed to do. And then you have a whole bunch of lists, another list that is things you want to do. And that just keeps piling up. So feeling overwhelmed, which kind of goes back to lack of control, right? You're out of homeostasis. You're not in control of your own life. You're not feeling in control of your own destiny. And that causes a lot of stress. Maybe there's probably a whole bunch of other things, but suffice to say, stress is actually a little bit deeper, right? And I was talking to Colin Boyd, a mentor of mine, who's literally an expert in communication, literally. And we were talking about why public speaking is so frightful for people. It's right up there with the fear of death. And one of the reasons is it is the ultimate, in some people's minds, it's the ultimate exposure of being judged. And we all have this deep-seated kind of issue. No matter how much work you've done, you still have this underlying issue or this fear that, are you enough? And so when you're exposing yourself into situations, you're being vulnerable, man, oh man, those can be tough. So those are stressful, right? You're being judged. Am I enough? And here's a bit of a newsflash, folks. Just between us, people actually think way less about us than we think they do. Like, seriously, folks, get over ourselves. Really, I don't think about everybody all the time. Sorry, no offense, and nobody thinks about me either. And that's okay. No harm, no foul. But anyways, I digress. So let's talk about, this is a really interesting picture for me in that this is taken from Pine Lake tornado in 2000. So mid Alberta, and tornado ripped through this campground, and a whole bunch of devastation, all those other things. We responded, and this picture was on the front page of our local paper, the Journal, and it's really interesting because I'm literally in the picture. Geez, here I am pointing to the picture on the screen. knowing that you can't see my finger, but anyways. So I'm the dude in the sexy orange pants and the orange vest with my hands in my pocket, sunglasses and hat. And I remember, so we responded down there and got the call. I don't remember if it was around 5 or 6 or something, maybe 6 or 7. I don't exactly remember, but the call from our local detachment, RCMP detachment, and hey, Daryl, like, yeah, what's going on, man? He's like, oh man, it's bad. It's bad. We think there's as many as 100 people missing, and it could be in the lake. Like we don't know where they're at because this particular campground was right on the lake. So we're like, all right, well, we spool up, and that's where this, the whole self-coaching model, 99 to 100 people, whatever, they're presumed missing. Well, I'm not going to get wrapped around the axle around that quite yet because I've got a job to do. I have to be kind of emotionally detached. It just is. So we go down there, and so I beat our team into the command post. And by beat, I mean, they stayed just outside the perimeter. I went in to receive a briefing. And the way it was set up was I couldn't see the campground yet. So it was just on, just down a hill. And the command posts, which was a whole different conversation, but we're all up on the top of this little hill. So I go in, I get my briefing, I talk to, friends and colleagues, and they give me my briefing and everything's great. And I'm like, okay, sounds good. We'll fire some crews off there. So I leave the command post. I talk to a couple of our teams out, get them into the perimeter now. And I thought, shoot, I should probably just check this place out, right? Like I haven't even seen it. And here I am going to be telling people what to do and all this other stuff. So I walked over the crest of the hill, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it took my breath away. The devastation, you could see that the tornado, because it had just gone over the hill and had ripped down and cut this almost perfect swath of, right through this campground and trailer park. And you could see just, like in the picture here, just utter devastation. This is just a small kind of view of it. And then across the lake, you could see cut perfectly right through the row of trees. It was like, and then you could see exactly where the tornado hit. And it looked literally like a war zone, And I thought to myself, wow. And the technique that I've learned over and over to use over and over is the technique I'm going to be talking about here next. But I'm here to tell you that, it was tough. It was really, really tough. And hey there, Hank. Yeah, that's okay. I'm glad you've joined us here, my friend. So that was my first experience. And I've recognized that experience in most search and rescue missions, most disasters I've responded to, if not all, even in a corporate environment as a project manager for many years, and I'm going into a particularly heated conversation or a presentation or something, there's that initial stress or feeling of stress and overwhelm, which is completely normal. But the message there is that there are ways to overcome that, and that's what we'll be talking about here. Oh, this is one of my favorite pictures of all time. It's my son, Hunter. And this is, first of all, he survived. This was not the last picture before he passed away or anything. This was Splash Mountain. And I'm showing this picture completely with permission because he laughs at it too. And so when we talk about what stressed you out, what are your most common stress reactions? And I'm not going to ask you that here, but give that some thought. What are your most common stress reactions? For me, it's typically irritability. For you, maybe it's something else. Maybe it's shutting down, or it's excessive use of humor or something like that. But think about that. So now as leaders, how do you deal with stress then? How do you regain a state of calm and maintain it? Therein lies the real challenge, right? So I'm going to give you two techniques or two tools. One is the HALT method, which is a little bit more of a proactive method, which I think is super, super critical. And anyone that's done some work internally around stress management or occupational stress injuries will recognize the concept behind this. And then there's another technique that I'll talk about in the moment using a defeat the beast of stress 5-step method. So let's get into that. First one is do not make a big decision when You're hungry. Right? Have you heard hangry before? Yeah, hells yeah. So think about that. If you're really hungry, don't make a big decision. And these are simple. Don't make a big decision when you're angry. Don't make a big decision when you're lonely. And don't make a big decision when you're tired. So halt. So if you're finding yourself getting amped up or upset or ticked off, figure it out. Are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely or tired? And if you can, put the conversation or the decision off until you're not hungry, until you're less angry, until you're not as lonely, until you're not tired. Maybe it's give it a good sleep. So remember that. That's a big watch out for you. If you're any of these things, try to avoid big decisions. So that's more of a proactive that will avoid the sense of overwhelm that can sometimes happen. But here's the method that I really want to talk about because, man, oh man, I could pontificate for hours on this. So let's talk about what is that kind of pathway to leading into feelings of stress. So an event or circumstances causes us to feel, quote unquote, stressed. Right? So remember, we have feelings of stress, but we aren't stressed. We're not stressed out. So as soon as we say I'm stressed or I'm stressed out, that takes away all of our power. It deprives us of the ability to process. So if you're having a feeling of stress or having stressful feelings, then that's okay because that actually now allows you to detach a little bit from it. And we get into a lot more detail in my leadership program. I'm not going to deep dive too far here into this in this video. Then that invokes that fight or flight response we talked about if the chemical hormones are dumped into our system and so on and so forth. And then our higher brain functions decrease and our heart rate increases, breathing increases, tunnel vision, all of those other things. And now I just want to talk a little bit about something else here. And we call this the stress curve. So let's look at this. So when I talk about the higher brain functions decrease, heart rate increases, and so on and so forth. What you see here is it's a Yerkes-Dodson performance curve, essentially. And so we better also known as a stress curve. So on the left axis or the y-axis, you see performance. And then on the x-axis, you see stress, right? Okay, so let's take a look at what happens here. Now, there's going to be something really, really important to drive out of this conversation. So let's say that we have low levels of stress. And so what will happen is our performance will actually be pretty poor. It'll be really, really bad, actually, because we just don't have any skin in the game. So you're going to see things like boredom. You're going to see complacency. You're going to see, if anyone's worked in a fire hall, man, oh man, this is where you're going to see the practical jokes. You're going to see all of those other things, right? So now let's say that we start to turn the dial up of stress, okay? So we start to turn that up a bit. And what you'll see is our performance will actually increase because as we turn the stress volume up, we will react accordingly because remember, we're now galvanized to action. Now, what you're going to see, though, is something really, really important here. We call this peak performance. Right there. That's at the top of the apex. So we're going to see peak performance. We're going to be what we call in the zone, right? I think we've all heard that term. You're in the zone. Okay, so that's great. That's where we've reached that optimal level of stress and our performance reacts accordingly. Now, let's say that we continue to turn that stress volume up. This is what we're going to see. I'll even draw there's even a little explosion here. So what's important to recognize is we've drawn a curve here that goes up, 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 and then it goes sharply down. And this is what I call the emotional and the cognitive danger zone. Right? So now, once we've reached that peak performance, we're in the zone. If we continue to turn that stress volume up, we will actually crash. And it will not be a gradual, oh, look at a nice little landing. It won't be like that at all. It will actually be a crashing and burning. Now, what's happening here is that essentially now we're talking about, we've become overwhelmed. And we're talking about now where the human body, the subconscious, can no longer process information. So what happens under stress, and this is the big problem when we talk about leadership, is that under stress, it becomes a matter of survival. So the CEO part of our brain, that prefrontal cortex, the part that's responsible for all of our decision making, all of our good communication, all of our figuring out relationships, how, causing and effect, all of that stuff that makes us human, that goes out, that leaves. CEO packs up his little briefcase and leaves his brain office and says, okay, cave person, you're in charge now. This is a survival issue. So that's what happens if you've thought about, why can't I communicate? Why can't I think under pressure and under stress? That's why. CEO has left the building, and the cave person, the primitive part of our brain, is now in charge, which is what a way it's designed. But it worked really well in saber-tooth tiger days, because who cares about the square root of 64? Who cares about being able to make a wheel? Who cares about any of that crap, right? I got a saber-tooth tiger here, dude. Like, got to figure that out first. Well, as we've evolved as human beings, what makes us human is this prefrontal cortex, the CEO part of our brain, which makes us really, really smart and better. I shouldn't say better, but different than the rest of the animal kingdom. But that goes away under stress, and there now lies the big problem. So when we talk about the performance curve, we all get there, we all get to the top. But man, oh man, it's a crashing and it's a burning as we move forward. So let's continue down now. So we talked a bit more about that. So here's the process. Recognize you are stressed, right? You're feeling stressed out, whatever that might look like or whatever that might feel like. So now, if we were to look at the next step here, right? So when I went across the cusp of the hill, this is now where I pause. I need to pause, take a little bit of a break, and then I'm going to take 2 deep breaths minimum. That's it so far, right? Not rocket science. If you can't do this, I don't know what to tell you. Recognize that you're having feelings of stress. Pause. So pump the brakes a little bit. Take 2 deep breaths, and not these like BS, like who cares, right? You gotta take a lot of breath in. You gotta expand your lungs, and you gotta be slow about it and be deliberate. Hold that breath in just a tiny bit, and then exhale. And do that a couple times. And in my own experience, that helps most of the time. Not always, but most of the time. If that still doesn't work, now you can pull out the big guns, right? And we call this box breathing. There are so many different terms for it. There's mindful breathing, there's yoga breathing, there's slow breathing, there's all sorts of different things. But what box breathing is essentially breathing like it's a box. And so let's take a look at what that looks like. All right, so let's see if I can be smarter than, is that going to work? Hold on, hold that thought. There we go. Okay. So now let's take a look at what this means. So box breathing is very straightforward, right? If I'm teaching it, it means, and if I do it, it means it's like pretty simple, right? Very, very simple. So we've got this. What this part is we inhale for 4 seconds. Okay. We inhale for 4 seconds. We hold it for 4 seconds. Okay. Bonus question here, folks. We exhale for 4 seconds. And then we wait for 4 seconds. That, folks, is box breathing. That's it. That is it. So let's take a look at that again. We inhale for 4 seconds. We hold it for 4 seconds. We exhale for 4 seconds. Now, the pro tip is that you inhale through your nose, hold it, and then you exhale through your mouth. And then you wait for 4 seconds. And that is, folks, what we call box breathing. That's it. That's it. It's not very difficult. Now, I would recommend starting a little bit small. 4 seconds, maybe you can, but maybe start with 2 seconds, start with 3. A friend of mine, he spent his lifetime in the military doing extremely high risk things that you'd literally read about in the newspaper. And there's an extremely prominent one that he was involved in that the entire world was kind of in on right after it happened, and it may have involved a crashed helicopter. But anyways, I digress. He does 7 seconds. 7 seconds, man, I would pass out. But that's what you can do, is you can build up. And it's to the point where it needs to become subconscious. And again, we call it mindful breathing, mindfulness, whatever that is. And herein lies the real benefit to it physiologically and scientifically, is it literally triggers what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, PNS, not to be confused with the other thing that sounds like PNS. I digress. So that's really important, because it works physically. So stress invokes this one system called the sympathetic nervous system, an SNS. So that's like putting your foot on the gas and getting ready to fight, flight, or freeze. The parasympathetic system is the one that's responsible for pumping the brakes, putting the big parachute on, stopping the horse, whatever that is. And one of the most effective and immediate ways you can do that is by doing box breathing, because by slowing your breathing down, that's telling the body and the brain, and there's some nerve things happening that says, okay, all right, we're going to fire up this other system here. And that's what is happening with box breathing. And then the last step here, as you can see, is you evaluate and repeat if necessary. So if you're starting to have feelings of stress, go ahead and do your recognize that you're having feelings of stress, pause, take 2 deep breaths. Like I said, a lot of times that's the one that works, that gets fixed. But if it still doesn't work, then start doing your box breathing and then evaluate and repeat. That's your 5 steps, folks. There it is. And if you get into the habit of doing that, you'll see your stress levels drop both in the moment. And I'm a huge advocate or proponent of, if we can handle stress better in the moment, we will see far less longer term impacts of stress. So we'll see a lot less prolonged effects of stress. We'll see a lot less occupational stress injuries and all of those other things, because if we can handle it in the moment, then we are going to be way better. Here's the other thing too, folks, especially in high risk environments, or if you're a leader and you're making large decisions, high stake decisions, this is what kills careers. This is what kills people, is our inability to handle stress. So important. And I've just given you 2 very solid techniques that I use and are proven to work. So that HALT method: avoid the big decision if you're hungry, if you're angry, you're lonely, or you're tired. Try to avoid making a big decision then. And if you're in the moment, do this: recognize that you're having feelings of stress, pause, take 2 deep breaths minimum. And if that doesn't work, start box breathing and just repeat. So when I talked about coming over the crest of that hill, right, in Pine Lake, 2 deep breaths. Okay. And then the other thing I add into that is, hey, you got this. You got this. And then you just go to work. So far over the last, couple of, videos, we've talked about that self-coaching model around circumstances and so on and so forth. Now we've talked about how to manage stress a lot better. Tomorrow, we are going to be talking about how to communicate more how to get respect influence. One of the biggest questions I hear time and time again is like, Daryl, how do I get respect? Man, or people don't respect me. Well, it's not actual rocket science, and we're going to be talking about that tomorrow. So hopefully this was valuable for you tonight and on this video. And I've kept you all long enough. If you have any questions, I'll stay on just for, there's a bit of a delay, like a 30-second delay or something. I'm more than willing to hang out for a little bit. So go ahead and type your questions in the comments if you would like. Hey, all right. Thanks, buddy. No, I appreciate that. And the other thing too, folks, before I forget, is these will be put up on my YouTube channel as well, and a whole bunch of other things too. But I think it's really important that we all help each other out as we go through this experience. And I can't stress enough how simple these techniques are, and they're almost deceptively simple. So, all right, folks. So thank you very much for your time and your effort, and thanks for joining tonight. And hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. We'll be talking about how to get respect influence as a leader. Have a great rest of the night, folks.